A very, very good evening. A warm welcome to Dan Really Likes Wine, presented by Pig & Bay. Welcome to the Table Bay Hotel, sitting in the heart of Cape Town, where as I look out from the Three Forks restaurant, the new restaurant here at the hotel, I am gazing out upon grey skies and lots of rain, and that's entirely my fault after posting on social media yesterday under bright sunshine that Cape Town was delightful in winter. Well, it's showing me that it can be a little Welsh today, but it is still a gorgeous city and a gorgeous hotel, the Cape Town home of Dan Really Likes Wine, where Joanne and her team have put us up for a few days and afforded us the entire restaurant. They've closed the place for Dan Really Likes Wine, but not, I suspect, because it is me and my show, but rather because I've got 6 luminaries of the wine world joining me on the show this evening. 6 people who are not just exceptional winemakers and deeply passionate artisans and craftspeople in terms of what they do in the wine world, but 6 people who have a particular persuasion when it comes to a particular grape. And that grape is Chenin Blanc. And you might be surprised that today we're talking about Chenin Blanc because, as has been engraved in your diaries digitally for months, if not years, tomorrow is Drink Chenin Day. It is a day when we raise large glasses, not just across South Africa, but indeed right around the world, to a grape that is doing wonders for the South African industry, both on its own as a single variety, but also as a wine that is forming the lead role in so many different blends. It's an extraordinary grape, it's a versatile grape, and it is a grape that we celebrate today. And we do so with 6 of the very, very best. And they are in no particular order. My guests today, Tyrrel Myburgh joins us from Joostenberg. We've also got Attie Louw from Opstal out in the Breede Kloof. David Sadie from David and Nadia. Sebastian Beaumont joins us from Beaumont in the Forrester area. Or we have Corlea Fourie from Bosman family Vineyards. And we have the godfather of Chenin Blanc, the tax evading money launderer from Somerset West, Mr. Ken Forrester. Warm welcome to all of you guys. Welcome to Dan's Really Likes Wine.
Thanks, Dan.
Hi, Dan.
I said earlier when we all jumped on screen, this is kind of like walking into the Chenin Blanc version of Live Aid, where instead of Bono and Bob Geldof and the Rolling Stones and Beyonce and everybody else you can imagine, I've just got this wonderful collection of winemakers. So welcome to all of you on the eve of Drink Chenin Day, and that's such an important day. It's a day that's driven by both our love of Chenin Blanc as winemakers, as drinkers, as wine people, but also by an association that brings all of you together for the benefit of us, those who drink. And it's one that's been driven by somebody who is no stranger to Dan Really Likes Wine. So, Mr. Forrester, to kick us off, if you will, in less than 45 minutes with your first answer tonight, just give us a little bit of sense of the Chenin Blanc Association, how this organization comes together, and what it actually means, because it sounds quite simple, but I suspect there's maybe a little more to it.
Dan, it's really a very relaxed organization. It's a group of Chenin Blanc lovers, a group of Chenin Blanc producers who get together. We have a committee, we call them the working committee. We attempt to kind of focus on just one little target at a time. We get together probably every 6 weeks, try and do it every month, but it's probably about every 6 weeks. And it's a lively group who are all putting their shoulder behind the wheel and driving Chenin Blanc for South Africa, and really doing a great job, a great group of people.
Corlea, there's so many grapes I could talk to you about. I was listening to you chatting to Tim Attie, so much wine you were celebrating with him, and yet I know despite all of those, Chenin Blanc is a grape that strikes a particular chord with you. As you look at this journey of Chenin Blanc from a wine that it was pretty much blue collar, it was the cheap stuff, it was the 4-day hangover stuff, it wasn't fine wine at all. That's so different now today. How exciting for you is the journey that Chenin Blanc has taken to where it is today? That's Corlea there, if we can jump over to Corlea.
Sorry guys, I was muted for the moment, but yes, what a wonderful journey. I think there's been so many winemakers before us who started this wonderful journey with Chenin. Very happy to be on the bandwagon at the moment and seeing it thrive. And yes, I think in terms of grapes, there is no other grape with the amount of enthusiasm and the amount of people just rooting for it to do well.
And it's continuing to do so well. The passion that you all speak about Chenin with is very clear, Corlea. What is it though in terms of making it as a winemaker? What makes this different? What excites you about making Chenin Blanc in South Africa at the moment?
You know, you don't want to use other cultivars or other grapes as a comparison, but some grapes, when you work with it, for instance, if you bring it into the cellar, it instantaneously smells of the most beautiful things. It has color and, you know, whatever. The long and the short is, most grapes come into your cellar with so much to give. With Chenin Blanc, it feels like it's that little treasure that comes in, and it's really adaptable to where it's planted and where it's grown and in which cellar, with which winemaking team it is then made. So it's almost this conduit. It shows where it's from, and I think that's why winemakers love working with it, because it shows a little bit of themselves and where they are in such a beautiful way. I'm not saying that other grapes don't do that, but I do feel that Chenin has this unique way of communicating place and provenance in such a wonderful way.
And it's a grape that's led to some very iconic modern South African wines. Amongst those is the Hope Marguerite from Beaumont. Sebastian, you've got a wine that now Chenin Blanc lovers flock to. It's become such a popular wine, such a sought-after wine, especially as the numbers are fairly limited. Is it a wine that still takes you a little by surprise, that you bring out another vintage, you go, crikey, that's good. I still can't quite believe just what Chenin Blanc is delivering to me here in the Bottrop area.
Yeah, Dan, thanks, man. It is a grape that I'm deeply passionate about, and took a decision about, I don't know, in 2005 that we weren't gonna be everything to everybody, and that we would become specialists in Chenin Blanc as our white cultivar of choice. And yeah, every vintage surprises me every year. I've just finished obviously the 2021s, and we just bottled our unwooded Chenin 21. And even this year, this wine has surprised me probably more than any other. Just the way that the ferment took so long. It was super cool vintage here with lovely conditions for ripening grapes slowly, which is what you want. And yeah, it's every harvest is different, and you always, you know, we're not magicians. We just try and interpret each year in its own way, and the character that you get out of the grapes, you know. So it's special in that way. Yeah.
Clearly a grape, as with Corlea, as with Ken, you're very passionate about. What about the amount of work? Is Chenin Blanc a grape that requires a huge amount of time and careful nourishing, or is it one of those grapes that you can kind of let to leave to get on with itself?
I think every grape, if you really want to make fantastic wines out of it, you need to spend a lot of time in the vineyards looking after them. And I'm very fortunate to work with two old vineyards. They were planted in the 70s, and yeah, they kind of they've got their characters and personalities, and then you try and get those to come through in the wine that you make. So at the end of it, it's very hands-off winemaking, as long as your ingredients are good. And then you just got to pay attention to what's going on in the ferment and in the kind of end of the fermentation process. That's probably the trickiest part for me in terms of my winemaking. So yeah, but every year is unique, and your raw ingredients are what make the wine. So good grapes make good fruit, good wine. So that's the way it works.
You mentioned a couple of vines from the 70s, and it is that old vine that is such a big part of the Chenin Blanc story. Tyrrell, if I look at your Joostenberg, it very proudly displays the old vine mantra on the label. Give us a little bit of a sense of what that means for people who are watching, and old vine, well, really, what is that about, and why that's a good thing? Because there might be people thinking, well, if it's old, surely let's get rid of it. Let's get some new vines. Why are old vines so important to Chenin Blanc in particular?
Well, taking a step back, I would say that, like Chenin Blanc was one of the first grapes planted in South Africa. When the Dutch arrived in 1652, they immediately planted Chenin Blanc. And so we've got this like 350-year-old history of Chenin Blanc in South Africa. It's really in our DNA. And I think as a South African and as a winemaker, if that doesn't sort of mean something to you, then I don't know, you've maybe chosen the wrong occupation, because wine is definitely more than just a drink. It's kind of got a soul. It's about people. It's about history. It's about, it's about everything. So yeah, that's like a big part of why Chenin is so special, is this very old history. But yeah, okay, going forward, old vine Chenin, I mean, we talk about anything that's older than 35 years old is an old vineyard. And I find that old Chenin Blanc vineyards tend to have this kind of special character to them. It's more than just the fruit. So you might not get this kind of flamboyant sort of fruit on the nose and this whole fruit salad mix and a whole tropical kind of thing to your wine, but you get this kind of depth of character. There's a little bit more texture to the wine. Yeah, it's kind of something that's quite difficult to explain, but speak to any winemaker and they'll tell you there's just something special about old vine. So we make one wine from a vineyard planted in 1982. That's the oldest vineyard on my property. And 1982, so that's the year I think the British invaded the Falkland Islands. That's a long time ago. I mean, and yeah, these gnarly old vines just kind of almost give sort of this depth and saltiness to the wine. I think, yeah, old vines are very special. It's a big part of what we do at Joostenberg.
You wouldn't just keep them though because it's a nostalgic and it's a nice thing to have. It's got to be practical as well. You're not getting as much fruit off an old vine as you would from one that's just a few years old.
Yeah.
So the amount of fruit is diminished, then ipso facto the quality must be good enough to offset that disparity.
Yeah, so I'll give you sort of a good practical example. I mean, my vineyard planted in 1982, we get about 2.5 tons to the hectare of grapes. And then I've got some Chenin Blanc, which was planted, which is now only 4 years old, and we get about 8 tons to the hectare. So there's a radical difference. I mean, you get tiny yields. So unless you're really happy with the quality that you're getting from these low yielding old vineyards, there's no point in keeping it. Yeah, so I mean, old is one thing, but obviously it's got to be good. Those two things have got to kind of line up perfectly.
So old vine Chenin, that name sits on the label of Tyrrell's wine we'll be tasting shortly. If we move over to the Carl Everson, and if you see there, the gentleman on camera is actually, he was the year below Ken Forrester at school, which is a nice link to our show this evening. You'll see the words single vineyard. We saw old vine Attie on the previous one. Your one has got single vineyard on. Again, for the uninitiated, what does that mean? Surely all wine comes from a single vineyard.
Yeah, so actually not, Dan. So wine can be made from various different vineyards. So if I were to make a Chenin Blanc, we've got a Chenin Blanc at Opstal where we use a variety, a number of vineyards, 3 vineyards that go in there. You're basically showing an estate wine. In the case of the Carl Everson, we work with the one vineyard every year. It happens to also be an old vine planted in the same year as Tyrrell's in 82. And so vineyard we use year in, year out. And it's single vineyard classified just to show that we only use the vines within that 2-hectare border. And the nice thing is it's for me, the nice analogy is taking that Polaroid snapshot of a vintage where the only differentiator is what the climate and Mother Nature gives you, because all the other elements stay the same. We use the same, as Sebastian alluded to, a minimal intervention approach in the winery and outside in the vineyard. We do alter vineyard practices. So we do try and work towards a more organic approach the last number of years, but you're working with the same fruit essentially year in, year out.
And that gives us this particular wine, given that it comes from a single vineyard. Does that make it easier and that you kind of know what you're getting every single year? Or is it a greater challenge in that you've got to try and give people what they're expecting from that bespoke high-level wine each vintage?
It's a good question, and I can give you a very long-winded answer because at times I have a lot of respect for winemakers that need to make the Buiten Verwachting Blanc, the Blanc, or the Durbanville Hills Sauvignon Blanc, for instance, because the consumer expects, and those consumers can be very, very critical and very difficult in terms of expecting a certain style of the wine. As with the Carl Everson making it from a single vineyard, you do have the beauty and also the nicety of showing and using the fact that it changed, that because not 1 year is the same, the wine's going to change from year to year. But having said that, there is a certain expectation in terms of quality and the standard. And Tyrrell alluded to terms like depth and soul and concentration, and I would add personality. That's the kind of things that I think is high on the expectation list when people drink a single vineyard old vine, stuff like the Hope Marguerite or FMC or David stuff, or the stuff that Corlea makes. There's a higher expectation in terms of what they want in terms of quality.
You mentioned the name David, so let's jump over to the Swartland and to, by some distance, the more famous Mr. Sadie, and have a look at the David and Nadia. And a great David that has played a big part in the South African story, but I think particularly in the Swartland story. If we look over the last while, wines from many Swartland producers, Chenin Blanc has played such a big role in terms of taking the Swartland, not just to South African wine drinkers, but putting on the map right around the world.
Well, thanks, Dan. Yeah, it's been a big privilege to be able to work with as many Chenins and specifically old vineyards like we do. And it's obviously a variety that we as producers from the Cape that we are obsessed with. So I think it's quite relatively easy to find good vineyards and to farm them and to be able to make great Chenins from them. So yeah, we were fortunate to be riding the wave that some more senior producers in our region started, and it led to basically that it led to a momentum where we could actually resign from our previous day jobs and focus 100% on our own wines. And since day one, it's been Chenin Blanc focused. So yeah, it's been a big blessing, and it's been a good background as to varieties we work with. We obviously work with a lot of different white varieties, but I would say from our white wine production side of things, it would be at least 75% Chenin Blanc and about 10 vineyards, of which 5 we farm as well.
I'm going to jump back to Ken in just a moment for a history lesson. But before I do that, David, we're seeing this terrific Chenin Blanc. All 6 of you are giving us great wines tonight, and there are so many more South African producers who are delivering great quality Chenin Blanc, as good as anything in the world, which begs the question, why did it take us so long to realize what we had?
Yeah, I think a lot of other varieties such as Grenache in Australia and America for many years were associated to be cheap and cheerful, and a brand like Lieberstein didn't do any good for us as a country in terms of quality production and specifically Chenin. So it really took producers such as Ken to really start an amazing revolution in the Cape, where the focus on quality Chenin became almost the norm for us in terms of younger producers. So thanks to a lot of guys that paved the way for us, it helped. And then obviously a focus on producing Chenin from the Cape, many styles, many producers, mostly dry. That's also the beautiful part of Chenin, is it can be a straw wine, it can be off dry, it can be sparkling wine. Our preference is obviously still wines and dry wines. So yeah, I think a collaboration between amazing group of producers, taking the Bredekloof producers as an example, where they decided to focus on Chenin Blanc as a region. So the buy-in from not just yourself, but from neighboring producers and as a country into one grape definitely makes it much easier.
It has culminated in a love of Chenin Blanc, a celebration of Chenin Blanc, which happens tomorrow, and that is why today's show has got the focus that it does. Drink Chenin Day, Friday the 18th of June, and it won't just be in South Africa, it'll be in America. Andrew Woolgar checking in from America. Hey Dan, looking forward to celebrating Chenin here in North Carolina tomorrow with Vineyards, Buffelsfontein and Johnny Nell's noisy Chenin Shiraz Rosé. Folks love the cultivar here for its balanced acidity and tropical notes. And there is a sweeping love of Chenin Blanc, and it is only growing, and it's growing into a space which I think probably even Ken Forrester might not have envisaged. Ken, if we go back 25 years or thereabouts, Ken Forrester arrives down in the Cape. You've got no money. You're this loud restaurateur from Joburg who wants to make waves in the winelands. You touch down, everyone tells you you're mad with what you want to do. What was it for you that said, you know what, there's a Chenin Blanc story to be told. It's not being told the way it could, and I want to tap into this potential?
Dan, I was fortunate enough to have spent some time in France in the Loire Valley at Chateau de Fel, which for those who've not been there would be spelled Chateau de Fez-les, Dan, that's F-E-S-L-E-S. Chateau de Fez-les, like that. And Bernard Germain was the proprietor, a man years ahead of his time. And he was an absolute passionate Chenin Blanc madman. And he was barrel fermenting Chenin Blanc 25 years ago. He produced a Chenin Blanc for the Parisian Japanese restaurants that said sushi Chenin Blanc on the label. The French appellation contrôlée panels went absolutely crazy with his abuse of the fact that he was Sancerre, or rather he was Sauvignon, and he had made this wine and called it Chenin Blanc. How dare you put Chenin Blanc on the label? And I was absolutely bemused by this archaic kind of behavior, and came back to South Africa, and here we had Chenin Blanc in bucket loads, and nobody seemed to be taking it seriously. I thought this is a great opportunity, if nothing else, because I truly believe that there was some virtual kind of value in Chenin that somehow the rest of the world, or the rest of South Africa until then, had been blind to. It was being used in blends. It was being used ubiquitously in virtually everything. I mean, everything that people were buying clearly had some Chenin in. Nobody was talking about it. And I thought it's time Chenin had its own moment in the sunshine. We started fermenting Chenin in barrels, and one of my neighbors was kind enough to ask me that when I'd come from Johannesburg, if I'd bought a return ticket, because as I was fermenting Chenin in a barrel, I'd be needing to use that fairly soon. Fortunately, 25 years later, we still not used those tickets. We're still here. We managed to prevail. And Chenin has, I think, really been the star of the show. The people who picked Chenin up, we've got some of the best winemakers in the world, not in the country, but some of the best winemakers in the world in this country, making Chenin Blanc, making some of the best wines in the world. It's an absolute pleasure to see it happen.
Now, sitting in 2021, it all seems like a fairly simple story. It unfolded. Ken told everybody Chenin was very nice. Everybody started making Chenin. And now we're finding the FMC and the Optenhorst and the Hope Marguerite and the Carl Everson and the David Nadia and the Joostenberg and top restaurants around the world. It obviously wasn't quite that simple. How tough was that early stage in the Chenin Blanc journey? And how much convincing did it take other people to join this new bandwagon of yours and say, you know what, Chenin Blanc is not just the cheap stuff to stick in a box and to parcel off inexpensively. It's wine royalty, and we need to make it that.
And it took multiple pairs of shoes. I've got to tell you, it took loads and loads of pavements and walking and knocking and rejections. And a lot of people simply didn't take it seriously. I mean, some of my good friends, wine collectors, serious wine collectors, to this day will come to me and say, we opened up an old bottle of your 2003 FMC or something. The wine's amazing. Wow. And I say, well, have you got any more? Well, no, we didn't buy any more because we never thought Chenin was going to do it. Well, you know, it's happened. Chenin is the de facto wine of South Africa. If anybody can pick one wine to represent South Africa at this stage, it just has to be Chenin. We know that. And we own the most Chenin Blanc in the world. We have the most Chenin Blanc in the world in the ground in South Africa, almost double France. And we're here to stay. We're going to make great Chenins for a long time to come. And I truly believe the best is yet to come. So there's a lot of youngsters, a lot of young people out here, a lot of new guys who are making unbelievably complex, rich, delicious wines from Chenin Blanc. And I'm looking forward to seeing more of them.
We've got a number of them to taste. So let's jump into tasting one of those. And this comes from Wellington, from Corlea. Tell me about two things, first of all, Corlea. The vines here, because they're 1952. So I think that was Ken's 21st. So you've got a real sense of vintage and history for these vines. But also tell me a little bit about Wellington, about making Chenin Blanc where you do, and how that affects what ends up in our bottles.
So Wellington is a fantastic place. I've been here now for 20 years and I don't have any plans on going anywhere soon. In terms of vines and how happy our Chenin is here, it's decomposed granite soils. They warm up nice and early in spring. And as I said before, Chenin Blanc shows so beautifully where it's planted. And I think granite soils actually is quite neutral. So it gives Chenin that opportunity to shine. Yes, the other thing is that we have abundant sunshine, and I think people always smirk when I say that, but we love sunshine because I think it shows in the generosity of our wines. People from abroad want to taste South Africa and they want to taste sunshine. Obviously, we have some vineyards in the Hemel and Aarde, and there, we've got the coolness of the proximity of the ocean, and that does very specific things as well, which we love on our Chenin there. But for the Opstal, it does give that generosity to old vines. We spoke about the fact that old vine wines are complex, and I think this adds just another layer to that. So decomposed granite soils, lovely generosity of our sunshine, and in this valley, I mean, we're in a beautiful valley with so many little, nooks and crannies and different little spaces on which we grow our Chenin. But even although we do have a fantastic load of Chenin Blanc on our farms, it just feels like there are so many different facets and different things that one can play with because it shows itself so differently from these places.
It's a wine I want you to introduce us to in a second. Before we do that, just the serendipity of actually having this wine, because we were very, very close to these vines just being gone. I think it was kind of the evening before these vines were about to be uprooted and pulled out. There was a decision to hang on to them and give them another go and allow us to be drinking what we're not drinking today.
That's very true. And Ken would tell you that you never stand in the way of a good story with the truth. So yes, just the night before it was, going to be taken out. Not really. It was in that winter. The vines would have been taken out. Luckily, the Bosman family went back to making wines in their historic 250-year-old cellar, and that meant that it was an empty cellar. And there was this plot of grapes that Petrus Bosman, our MD, was a bit worried about because he knew that it was the oldest vineyards that the Bosman family had. They were definitely being taken out. So we went to the site. It was early morning, and I do definitely, I'm very sentimental about that day. It was beautiful. It was harvest, and the grapes were fantastic. And we said, let's take a small little parcel. Let's make wine. And we were talking before about old vines. And I think this is the test. If a wine can really make its way onto a tasting table or into a bottle and really show its worth because it's old vine, then it's worth it. Not everything which is old is antique and valuable. It really needs to have a functionality and a beauty about it. And this site definitely had that. So we made 6 barrels, and it was just after fermentation, natural fermentation. It took forever. I almost became grey. But when we tasted it, it was the most beautiful guava and cinnamon. It was like the most beautiful dessert you could ever think about. And we were really, really pleased.
It's a wonderful spin, a wonderful South African spin on the sense of vintage. We tend to just think of vintage of the wine in which the year was made, but I think the year in which the vines were planted is such a big part of our South African story. So we've got wines that will be 70 years old next year. We've got the made on decomposed granite. We've got the made by the magical hand of Corlea. What does that then give us in our glass today?
Well, it gives you in your glass a snapshot. I love Instagram, taking pictures of beautiful things around me. And I think that this glass of wine is that picture of this season. So we spoke about earlier as well how difficult it is making wines which need to be the same every year. And this definitely tells us something about 2019 and what we experienced there. So concentration, a lot of depth because of the vintage. But then all of these things that we also know about Opstal, it has a beautiful pithiness, almost that beautiful pithiness that you get on a grapefruit. And we love that because that also gives texture to the palate. And then in terms of what you smell, it's usually some kumquats and almost pickled, not pickled, that sugar rind on a lemon peel. And then, yes, apricots. That's basically what I get when I have this glass. And it changes the whole time whilst it becomes a little bit warmer and the night progresses.
And it doesn't just change over the course of glass, it changes over the course of another year, 2, 5, 10 in bottle. And that's one of the wonders of top-class Chenin Blanc. Let's head over to Bottrefeer. Sebastian, I know we've had this conversation before, but for people who might almost unforgivably have not watched an episode of the show with you and me together, let's just remind them, Hope Marguerite. There's something rather special to the name, isn't there?
Yeah, yeah, Dan, it's I think when one kind of looks at people ask me, where does Hope Marguerite come from? What's the name mean? And is it Chenin? Because we don't put Chenin on the front label, it's always on the back label. But yeah, the wine's kind of created its own status in a way. And I guess I was actually just looking at my back labels, the new ones. I've put there something that says elegance over power, which is kind of a little statement that we've kind of included on our wines. And it was inspired by my grandmother. So her name was Hope Marguerite. She kind of loved plants and farming and wine, and she traveled with some of the kind of real old mainstays of the wine industry. She'd gone off to Burgundy and to different parts of the world to go and experience wine. And she'd come back here and said to my parents, look, we've got this old cellar. Why don't you do something with it and do something with these wines? And my parents were a little bit like hesitant at the time. And then eventually in 1996, my mother had kind of started making some wines, and she made this first barrel of a wine. We called it the Chenin Blanc Reserve at that time. And then the next year, in '97, we called it the first. We named the first vintage of Hope Marguerite. It was one barrel of barrel fermented Chenin, and it's not that long ago. But at that time, there were hardly any Chenins that people put into barrels, because it was just seen as the kind of this horrible term, the workhorse of the industry, and there was no real focus on putting. We're trying to make real quality wines out of Chenin, but I think we just. We kind of saw the potential, we liked it, and we tried it out, and it was experimental in the beginning, and kind of has slowly found its way in the industry. And yeah, it's a wine that's made in her kind of image. She was an incredibly elegant, complex, fascinating person up to the age of 90. You could have a serious discussion with her about wine, and we shared some very similar philosophies on the kind of styles that we wanted to make and the wines that we like to drink. And that's where, I've kind of modeled the wine around those discussions and kind of ideas. Not too much new wood, and elegance definitely over power in this wine as my approach.
It sounds like the wine is one she would greatly appreciate, and that the tribute is particularly apt. You've created the wine in honor of her, but you've also created a wine that has to take from where it comes, the Bottrefeer terroir. What is it about where you are, about the terroir that you have, that has given us this wine that's really become a cult figure in the Chenin Blanc world?
Yeah, I think it is a unique terroir. I think everybody's got a unique terroir if you allow the terroir to express itself in the wine. It's and terroir is this kind of mysterious term that sounds very French, and nobody really understands what it means. But it's a kind of an expression of place, and I think an expression of place is your soil, your climate, your proximity to different things that influence your grapes and how they ripen. So in Bot River, we have a couple of factors that I think are quite intense. We have these lovely shale soils that are quite salty. We have we get blasted by the southeaster in the summer, so that has a way of dehydrating the vines and doesn't allow too much vigor in the vineyards and gives good concentration in the fruit. And then we're about 12 k's from the sea, so that has a kind of a moderating effect on the climate. And I think those three combined with a fantastic team that I have on the farm here. We're a small family business. We don't make a lot of wine, and part of the terroir is the people that you work with and what they contribute to making the wine. And that's looking after these vineyards, replanting, looking at where you can put in a little inboetstokkie, we call it, where vine has died, and these Hope Marguerite vineyards, we're trying to do that and try and keep them going for another 47 years. I won't be here, but hopefully maybe my kids will still be interested or something like that.
No, I don't know. I think there's a preservative quality to Chenin Blanc that will keep you going. Ken's good evidence of that. The fact that you use a lot of older wood means that the fruit really comes to the fore, but there's still that beautiful savory snap to the wine. If there is somebody out there who hasn't had some Hope Marguerite, I think there's still 7 people in South Africa who haven't as yet. Just introduce them to the wine, if you will.
Yeah, that lucky number. I know. I've got to get those guys sorted. Those 7 people. Yeah. We'll sort them out, yeah. But it is a special wine, and that 19 that you got is a pretty unique vintage. It's got a little bit of extra residual sugar in it, which kind of surprises people. But that's the way the vintage came out, and that's what the wine showed. So it's magical in that way.
It certainly is. The Hope Marguerite, you've got the name there. I'd like to find out about another name as we head over to Paarl and to Joostenberg. Tyrrel de Achteros. It starts Afrikaans, it finishes, it sounds like it could almost be Greek, really. Give us the background of not just what the name means, but why you've chosen it.
Yeah, so a bit of an unusual name. So it's from the oldest vineyard on the farm, planted in 1982. And there's this Afrikaans saying, Achteros kom ook in die kraal. And if you translate that, it's the Achteros is the hind ox. So when teams of oxen worked in the fields to pull the plows, the hind ox, or the ox that was behind in the team, was the smallest or the youngest ox. And as it got more experienced and older, it worked its way to the front of the team. And eventually it kind of got to the front. So the saying, Achteros kom ook in die kraal, means, if as long as you kind of work at it, even if you start off being a little bit slow and underskilled, just keep at it and you'll get there eventually. And that's kind of the story of this vineyard. We for the first 20 years or so, it's a dry farm bush vine vineyard. We sold the grapes to the local co-op. In our case, that's Simon's Vlei, which no longer exists, and the wine went into these kind of massive big blends, and it just disappeared. And eventually, in 2014, and by that stage, the vineyard was, I think, 32 years old. That's right. We realized that this vineyard is actually like our favorite vineyard on the farm, and finally, this vineyard had kind of come to the fore. So Achteros kom ook in die kraal. It's like the vineyard had finally got there. So that's where the name comes from. And in a way, that's the story of Chenin Blanc. We went through like this long history of winemaking in South Africa, from the 1657 or whenever that was, and for a long time we just didn't realize that we had this like absolute gem in our hands. It's like one of the greatest grapes in the world, and we were making brandy out of it, and we're doing all kinds of things with it, making sort of very pleasant wines, but we didn't realize what its value was. Anyway, so that's the name of the wine. It's about a 6-hectare block on Joostenberg, and planted in sort of actually very, very poor soils. And the vines, even though they're now 36 years old, they're still quite small, and very low yielding. And so we use this vineyard to make this wine, the Achterros.
There's a wonderful bit of spice to it, and another one of our terrific Chenins from a region, Tyrrell, that I always feel is almost a little Cinderella-ish. It doesn't get the publicity of Stellenbosch or of a Swartland with its new wave of rockstar producers. And yet when you dig down just a touch, you don't have to go far, whether it's the history of Niederberg or all of the grapes for the Villafonte, which is making such waves around the world, or the wine of yourself at Joostenberg. There's both a lot of history and a great deal of success. If we channel that into Chenin Blanc in particular, what is it for you in the Parle area, in the terroir that you lay claim to, that's allowing you to produce Chenin Blanc of this quality?
Well, like a lot of wine areas, there's massive diversity within our appellation. I mean, so we are on the edge of Stellenbosch. So literally across the road from me, there are Stellenbosch vineyards, and within sort of 5 kilometers, the first Durbanville vineyards start. So we are on the southwestern border of the Paarl appellation. And then you get vineyards all the way up to Du Toitskloof, which are very far away. You get vineyards on the Berg River, which might be irrigated. So there is so much diversity in Paarl. So it's difficult to really kind of buttonhole, the appellation. And it's kind of like, in a way, it's like the Swartland was maybe 10 years ago. I think there's quite a lot of old vineyard and a lot of kind of undervalued vineyards, and I think Paarl's time is kind of yet to come. I hope so, anyway. And this is a Paarl wine, but I wouldn't say it's very typical of the Paarl region. And I say that because even within my farm, the soil is quite peculiar on this site. It's very shallow. It's kind of a duplex soil, and it's the wine that you get from the vineyard is particularly elegant. The alcohol is always between 12.5 max, maybe 13 in some vintages. And it's kind of got this elegance to it. So you'd expect that from a Paarl vineyard, you'd get a little bit more power, a little bit more kind of texture, perhaps. And this is actually almost closer to what you'd get in maybe a cooler Stellenbosch site, or even towards the Loire, if I may say so. Yeah.
Certainly a blast of freshness to that wine, a wine that is Chenin Blanc, and we celebrate Chenin Blanc Day tomorrow. Drink Chenin Day right around the world and right across Africa. And Ngoni Tizwa joining us. Hey, Dan, we'll also be opening up some phenomenal Chenin up here in the Serengeti for Drink Chenin Day. Well, cheers to that, Ngoni. And then the person who actually does all the work, Ken will take all the credit, but the person who does all the work for the Chenin Blanc Association is the wonderful Ina Smith. Dan, a very special hi to the Chenin producers on your show. We will meet up tomorrow for a very special International Drink Chenin Day. That we certainly will. Let's head over to the Breede Kloof, and an area that I think mirrors the Chenin Blanc story so nicely, because Chenin Blanc was this very entry level. We don't think too much of it. It's very quiet wine, and then it just kind of exploded onto the scene. And that's been like the Breede Kloof. You meet the people there, and they're very unassuming. They don't shout a whole lot about the wine that they make. And then you drink their Chenin Blanc, and you think, why have I not had this before? And I remember doing a Breede Kloof makers session with you, Attie, a few years ago with Pete Goff-Wood up in Johannesburg, where the range of wine was as enticing and appealing as the people who make it. You've got a wonderful, wonderful community, great people, but also an area that just really lends itself to terrific Chenin Blanc.
Yeah, I think we're guilty in the sense that we were and still maybe a bit the toch apologetic Afrikanertjies out in the Breede Kloof especially. But we've learned a lot, and I think these kind of wines has given us that confidence, the self-confidence to go out and present with a bit more, a bit more belief in our wines and in our area. And I think that was desperately needed. As you say, the Chenin we do a lot of Chenin in the Breede Kloof amongst and in between the mountains that surrounds us. And now through the Breede Kloof makers and not too dissimilar to what the guys in the Swartland, that collaborative effort. And I know the guys out in Sebastian and Botriver always, the cool thing for me is, the fun we had in the 10 minutes or the 15 minutes prior to getting onto the show was what the wine industry for me is about. And it's not any different in the Breede Kloof. We joke around and we have a lot of fun, and we learn from one another a hell of a lot. And Chenin has been the focus for us in terms of that learning and that co-learning over the last 6-7 years. And so there's a lot of info sharing, and my dad, he was winemaker at Opstal and still he's still around on the farm. But he said to me, but when in the 80s, when he started off in the industry, mid 80s, it wasn't as much people sharing ideas and sharing their philosophies on wine and what they were doing in the winery. It was very much a closed book from one winery to the next. And so the energy and the shared spirit and the shared goal that there is in the wine industry, and especially so with the Chenin Blanc Association, and I can also speak for the Chenin producers from the Breede Kloof, is very rewarding. It makes what we do a lot of fun.
Almost as much fun as it is drinking your wine, Attie, which is exactly what I'm doing now. A wine called the Carl Everson. Again, as with Sebastian earlier and Hope Marguerite, it's a story we've told before on the show, but it's worth repeating. Remind us who Carl Everson is, and then for you, why this is the very best of the Chenin Blanc that you can offer us.
Yeah, Carl Everson was my great-grandfather, and I started. David actually was my roommate at varsity, and so the Carl Everson was actually born from a couple of bottles later one evening in 2011, when we had one of those commercially made Chenins from our farm, which struggled to sell at that time when the Sauvignon Blanc wave was very much at its peak. And myself and David had a 2009 Chenin Blanc from Opstal, made in a very, like I said, safe and commercial way. And it was almost as if the wine was, it was supposed to be, sold out by then. We weren't supposed to have any of it left, but I sat with some stock, and we thought that this wine has been getting better and better the last, year to 18 months that we've been having this, and that's where David actually gave me a nudge and to really focus in on where the fruit comes from, and that's where the Carl Everson from that single vineyard was made, and that was 2012 was the first vintage, and we've been making it in a relatively the same way ever since. And the fruit doesn't change and the vineyard doesn't change, but it still remains a wine that I'm torn between how easy it is or how tough it is. To actually make the wine is very easy, but getting the approach in the vineyard and the soil 100% correct is what we are spending a lot of time and energy on at the moment. And so and to keep on delivering a good wine and to keep doing it for another 10-20 years. As with Tyrrell, the vineyard is close to 40 years now old and still very healthy, and so we learn a lot by working with that vineyard year in and out.
It's a wine that you describe as being a good wine, as always in the Breede Kloof, very understated. It's far more than a good wine. I'm a little more interested now, though, based on your comments, on not so much good wines, but good roommates. David Sadie, what was Attie Louw like as a roommate?
Well, we used to play a bit of rugby together, and we both had serious injuries at some stage. So it got quite handy when we had to wash one another's backs in the showers. So it was good to have a very good friend and roommate that you can really share a shower with and make sure your back is properly washed after a game. Now, it's been a good journey. Our parents actually went together at varsity back in the 70s already, so our families have known one another quite for a couple of years. But it's been, like I said earlier on, it's been an amazing thing to see the buy-in from producers in the Breede Kloof, which is obviously big production producers as well, to see them buying into this concept of focusing on Chenin Blanc. And yeah, I think it's a privilege for myself to sit in the Swartland with an amazing group of producers that's really international leaders in terms of their styles and their wines and their success. But then to see more of the Cape producers also following Chenin as a focus variety. So it's even, yeah, to reaffirm that that's synonym to the Cape. I mean, we've got 5 white wines that we release once a year, and 4 of them are straight Chenins, and 1 of them is at least 50% based on Chenin. So there's not a really much into it for me to focus and play around with other varieties. It's really focusing on Chenin a lot.
And in the case of the Chenin we're focusing on with you, it's Chenin that's ever so slightly different in that it's just so slightly older. It's 2016, so not earth-shatteringly old, but it's still got a little bit of age on it. Tell us a little bit about your thoughts on the aging of Chenin Blanc and the value of having wine that's not just from an older vine, but that's been in a bottle for a little longer.
Yeah, I think specifically if you make it in a slightly more understated style, in terms of not fruit forward and upfront at a young age, the wines definitely does need a bit of age. So I think it's really a privilege if you can hold your wines a bit back. Obviously, cash flow is so important in doing that. 16, as an example, has been the warmest vintage in my career up to date. We had 2 heat waves. And normally within our region, we rely on a diurnal shift, day-night temperature-wise. So the 16 was quite intense, and we preempted the heat waves by picking earlier. So we managed to get lower pHs, but not higher acids. And I think the lower pH aspect of the wine actually helped the wine to age a lot. We've recently done some verticals on some varieties, and definitely I think our white wines will actually outlast our red wines. So Chenin, if you farm and if you have a good vineyard, you're able to get low and good moderate levels of pHs. The ageability of the wine will come by itself if you've got a low pH.
Very quickly, this is the David Nadia Sauvignon Blanc that we're drinking. But what makes it stand out for you? Why do you feel this is a wine that really does deliver?
Was it Sauvignon or Chenin, Dan? Yeah, you got me blushing there when you say it's Sauvignon. Yeah, I think most of all our wines would be understated at a young age. It's not overpowering. We love salinity in wines, specifically with old vines and with Chenin, specifically from Paardeberg. So it's a blend of 7 different vineyards, part of the Old Vine project, and it's focusing on granite. We also have an influence of shale, of clay, and of iron gravel in that wine, which all adds and contributes. So initially, the 16s were at least the first year or 2 after bottling very restrained, and it took longer to open up as some of the vintages like 17 and 15 has been. But yeah, tension, eventually texture, linearity is important for us in Chenins, and with time, it obviously fattens out and it gets, let's say, more textural in style. But we try to make our wines bone dry, below 2 grams a liter of sulfur, of sugar, and also use old oak, so basically neutral oak, as we call it, to focus on the freshness we have. We don't have huge acids in the Swartland, so we need to rely on the low pH, and the salinity, minerality aspect of it. And I think that will be just enhanced as time goes on.
And that combination, it almost seems slightly oxymoronic, dryness, but still loads of fruit. And yet there is a wonderful freshness that comes through, and it delivers on the 5th of the Chenin Blancs we've tasted this evening. I've left the grandfather, the godfather for last with his. And you might be thinking, well, there's no doubt we're going to be trying the FMC. It is the famous Ken Forrester Chenin Blanc. But in fact, we are not. And as we close off our tasting, Kenneth, the dirty little secret. And I'm sure you've got many of them, but this is the one that you've bottled. Tell us a little bit about this wine and where the name comes from.
Dan, when you told me that tonight was going to be a whole lot of hipster rock star Chenin Blanc producers, I could not help thinking of Woodstock. I know you were there. And I mean, we've got Corlea, who could be Janis Joplin. Sebastian has to be Jimi Hendrix. You got David Sadie, who would be kind of Crosby, Stills or Steve Stills. I mean, think of Sweet Judy Blue Eyes, and there's David. I mean, you've got Attie, who would be Arlo Guthrie with his Wheel of Fortune. You got Tyrrell, who's Joe Cocker. I mean, with a little help from my friends. Dan, you would be the Grateful Dead, I think. I mean, that's where you would fit into the picture. And I thought, I've got to be with a group of people like this. I really need to pull out something special. And this is a vineyard that was planted in 1963. Right up high in the Cederberg, but it's in fact the foothills of the Cederberg. On the western side, it's in Pikkenierkloof at about 650 meters above sea level. This beautiful old Chenin Blanc vineyard planted in sandy soils. And I was very fortunate to be able to get this fruit and to have some time in this vineyard and work this vineyard and planned it and pruned it and kind of went through a few vintages in the vineyard. And I decided I didn't want to make a snapshot of just one vintage. I would rather produce a composite of what this vineyard is. And if you think of all of the champagne that you've ever drunk, excuse me, probably about 90% is non-vintage, maybe 95% is non-vintage. And all of that non-vintage champagne is multiple vintages blended together. And I love that concept of holding the wine in old neutral barrels for 3 or 4 or 5 years, and then blending it with younger vintages as you produce your younger wine. And you've got a reserve of older barrels, and you use your older barrels to temper your young wine and to create a family line through the wine. And like today's very clever modern cameras, where you take a picture and it's actually a composite of 1,000 frames taken in a millisecond, and it pushes all of those frames together to give you a composite picture. Exactly that. I wanted a composite picture of this vineyard. So it's a special wine for me. It's a single vineyard. Dirty Little Secret is the name. And it's a single vineyard planted in 63, bush vine Chenin Blanc, unirrigated. And here you have multiple vintages. And on the cork, the only reason I use this piece of cork, and it's not a cork actually, it's a technical closure. It's a thing called a diam closure. On the cork, there's a list of seemingly innocuous numbers, and those are all couplets, and each couplet is a vintage that's contained in the wine. So this wine is made from 3 different vintages, and it's simply called number 2. You can see on the label, it's simply called number 2. It'll never have a vintage on it. So it's Chenin Blanc, 100% Chenin, aged in old barrels. It's we crush it with skins and stalks. We want the stalks to be there to give us a kind of protein in the structure so that we get clarity later on in settling. And we pick it quite early because we know we're going to lose some acidity in the second malolactic fermentation. And it's a wine which is essentially, technically, a natural wine, wild yeast fermentation. We do add a little bit of sulfur, a very small amount of sulfur at bottling, and hence you get a little bit of color on the wine, but it ages absolutely beautifully. And here you're dealing with the oldest component from 2016. It's already 5 years old.
And that is a perfect way to conclude another reminder of the versatility, the diversity that exists within Chenin Blanc. We've got 6 very different wines we've tasted this evening from 6 people in very different parts of South Africa, and yet all of them linked together by a love of Chenin Blanc and a masterful ability to turning into something quite magical. So to all of you guys, tomorrow is a really important day for you, for the wine industry, for South Africa as a whole, as we celebrate Chenin Blanc and the work that it does. So to Ken, to you in the association, keep up the terrific work. To Sebastian, to David, to Tyrrell, to Attie, to Corlea. Guys, thank you, not just for some lovely wine, for your time today, but for the great wine you keep making, keep giving us, and for the enormous passion and enthusiasm and excitement you have for our wine industry. It is infectious. We feel it in the bottle, we feel it in the glass, and I know we're going to do so particularly tomorrow. So cheers to all of you. Thanks for some lovely wine. Thanks for a great conversation. Keep making wonderful Chenin Blanc and keep doing wonderful things for our wine industry. Cheers to you all. To Chenin.
Yes. Wonderful to be with you. Wonderful to be with you. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan.
Bye, guys.
So there we go. Headlined by the great Ken Forrester, who put Chenin Blanc on the map, but joined by 5 other winemakers who are taking Chenin Blanc into new and more exciting territory with every passing vintage. It's been a lovely evening, and it's leading in to a very special day tomorrow. Make sure you have a glass of Chenin in hand. Chenin for breakfast, fabulous idea. Toss some back with a croissant or a bit of breakfast sushi. And if you happen to be out in the winelands and you're joining myself and Ken tomorrow at Ken Forrester, there's an Asian-inspired celebration there. In fact, the theme for the Chenin Blanc Association, Ina and her team this year, is Chenin and sushi. So lunch tomorrow, or maybe dinner, throw back some Japanese fare with a bottle or two of your favorite Chenin Blanc. And I think if you haven't tried it before, you'll be very pleasantly surprised by the combination. But then that is one of the joys for me of Chenin Blanc. It is so versatile, not just in what you can do with it as a grape, as our winemakers have shown, but what you can eat it with, what you can enjoy it with, what you can celebrate with. And celebration is at the heart of an industry that just continues to do South Africa proud, and Chenin Blanc so much a part of that particular story. Thank you for joining us this evening. Thank you to our winemakers. Thank you to the team at the Table Bay for hosting us here at Three Forks, their new restaurant. If you haven't been, you're in Cape Town, do drop down. It is well worth a visit. Enjoy your Chenin Blanc day tomorrow. Make sure you hashtag drink Chenin in all your social media posts. And I will see you on Monday when I am at Mr. Pants, the wine bar in Johannesburg, where I'll be joined by Derek Kilpin from Great Domains and 2 of the biggest names in Burgundian wine as we throw back some French fare that's almost as good as South African. Have a lovely drink Chenin day. Grab some at Pick and Pay if you can still this evening. And we'll see you back on air next week. Goodbye. To join the Pick and Pay Wine Club, simply SMS your smart shopper number to 36775. It's absolutely free, and you'll get for yourself 3 times the smart shopper points on every bottle of wine bought. You'll also get a 20% discount on 10 different wines each month, a 25% discount on a case of wine, and a Magnum, some terrific competitions and invitations to awesome events.